Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of our series called Software Package Deconstruction, Assessing Risks to Your Software Supply Chain. Each episode, we deconstruct a software package and do a deep dive into its risk profile to better understand its unique attack vector. And we hope that in some small way, we can enable your security team to stay one step ahead of malicious actors. Next slide. Let's start with a little housekeeping. If you have any questions or comments, please submit them through the Q&A feature on Zoom webinar. We're recording this episode for those who can't attend live, and you'll be able to find it on our website's media pages shortly after the conclusion of today's webinar. After the webinar, we'll also be sending out a follow-up email to all registrants with any relevant links we think you might find useful, as well as a link to the aforementioned recording. And finally, if you like subtitles, click the live transcript button to enable Zoom's closed captioning feature. Next slide, please. Protecting organizations from increasingly sophisticated cyber threats is what we do. At ReversingLabs, we leverage the world's largest threat intelligence repository to protect software development and power advanced security solutions. Our threat intelligence repository is 7 times bigger than VirusTotals, and it keeps the most advanced cybersecurity organizations and Fortune 500 enterprises informed and in front of malicious actors. Our software supply chain security and threat intelligence solutions have become essential tools for advancing enterprise cybersecurity maturity globally. ReversingLabs operations are spread throughout the US and Europe, with offices in Zagreb, Croatia, and Cambridge, Massachusetts. And our customers are in just about every corner of the globe. We have just under 300 employees, and we're looking to hire more. So if you or someone you know is in the market for a new opportunity, please check out our careers page to view our current openings. Next page, please. Next slide, rather. Thank you. The man who will be deconstructing these software packages for you is Tim Stahl, a seasoned security professional who boasts almost 20 years of experience in information security, with additional experience in information technology related to both the engineering and administration of enterprise networks. Tim has secured and defended networks across .mil, .gov, and .com enterprise domains, and his expertise includes the tracking of both APT and criminal groups, threat intelligence, threat hunting, data analysis, OSINT research, DevOps, and SIM engineering. Next slide, please. The subject of today's software package deconstruction is crypto wallets. Now, for those of you who don't know, a cryptocurrency wallet is a device, physical medium, a program, or a service which stores the public and/or private keys for cryptocurrency transactions. In addition to this basic function of storing the keys, a cryptocurrency wallet more often offers the functionality of encrypting and/or signing information. The bottom line here is that crypto wallets use software. That software has its own supply chain, and software supply chains are vulnerable to attack by malicious actors. In fact, some hackers will go to great lengths to specifically target crypto because they believe it's more profitable. Next slide. The tool we'll be using to analyze crypto wallets is the software supply chain security platform from ReversingLabs. The SCS platform decomposes the final deployment software image, describes its underlying software behaviors to determine deployment risks, and when it finds a red flag, it prioritizes remediation guidance. SSCS is powered by the world's largest private file reputation repository, with over 10 billion files and about 8 million new files added daily. It not only helps prevent threats from reaching production, but can also find exposed secrets before release. As a bonus, it can also generate a complete SBOM. And with that, let's turn it over to Tim to begin his deconstruction.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining. I think this will be an interesting session. This is going to be mostly data-driven. We're going to go through a lot of slides here. I've done the analysis of all these packages, gone through the data. Now we're just going to talk about the findings and the overview and how you do these types of comparisons. This is applicable if you're purchasing software, you're choosing a vendor, that kind of thing, or if you're doing analysis on a brand new package. If you buy a new piece of software and you start doing that analysis, that supply chain analysis from a TPRM perspective, it's a blank slate. You're coming in out of the cold. You really don't have any frame of reference. As we've discussed before, a good idea for that would be to go back and get maybe 2 or 3 previous versions, run those as well to get a feel for it and a baseline. Another option would be something like this, where you grab other elements or other software that do the same thing and you analyze a bunch of them, see what to expect across all of them, what are the shared elements, and that helps you pick out the anomalies. In this session, we went through 9 different crypto wallets, right? You can see on the chart there the different ones we have. And this is an overview of the findings. Some of this I think is really interesting. And from the outside looking in, you really don't know what's under the hood of these things. There are some things you have to keep in mind, right? You can't make assumptions based on software. There is no standard. There is no, oh, if it's this size, it has this. The bigger it is, the more vulnerabilities it'll have, the more third-party applications it'll have, the more complex it'll be. That does not work. You never know what you're going to get when you start looking at these things. So if we see the charts on the left here, for each wallet, the blue column is the package size. The orange column is the count of components in that. And you can see that there's not really a correlation. Small packages may have more. Garda, for example, it's not the biggest package, but it has one of the biggest counts of components. Same with Wasabi. Wasabi has just over 500 separate software components inside it, but it's the same size as some of these other ones. So you just never know how it's going to be built. There's 1,000 different ways to bake a cake. You never know who's going to do what. So you can't say small package, lower risk. That doesn't always equate. Underneath that, we have the vulnerability counts. And again, package size, package complexity doesn't really dictate how many vulnerabilities and how many issues it may be. So you have to do this analysis because you just never know what you're going to see. Overall, on the vulnerability side, on the chart on the right, we can see third-party packages. There are a lot of really common third-party packages that you'll see across all software. The last 3 on the chart, OpenSSL, libtiff, and zlib, we see one of those in almost every package we see. The zlib is just one of those things that everyone uses. No one's going to recreate the wheel, so everyone uses that. But that's also one of those things that people don't look. If it doesn't break, it doesn't get fixed. So this is what we talked about in the last session, file rot, where as long as it works, it'll just sit there, but it ages over time and it'll start stacking up CVEs, missing mitigations, and other issues. So it becomes more and more of a risk over time. And these things just get overlooked by vendors. So we'll see that a lot. And these little cheats, you'll notice as you do more analysis, and it makes it a lot quicker. When you see that, you know you're going to see a certain cluster of vulnerabilities when you see zlib. At the same token, if you're a software producer, if you fix these, it takes care of most of the issues with your package. The problems that we see aren't necessarily in the vendor's code themselves. There are so many tools and processes to catch those things early that they don't generally flow through to the finished package. It's the third-party components where you see those issues. So let's get into the wallet. So Atomic Wallet has been in the news recently. They had an attack by an APT group, but overall the package isn't bad. Right? If we just look at the vulnerability side, and on the left you can see a breakdown. So we had some compliance and exposure issues here, mitigation related. There are no threats. We didn't find any threats or malware in any of these wallets. So you're safe on that side. Again, we talk about size. So 70 megs, but there's not that many issues. And you can see the source of the vulnerabilities here are third-party packages. There's always dependencies. Those dependencies are where these things happen because these age out over time. And there's a couple CVEs where there are exploits that exist, but they're all recent, right? So this is, again, an indicator of file rot. When you start seeing CVEs that are 4, 5, 6, 10 years old, then you know that package has bigger issues. And you generally see that in the issues that you see in the overview. So findings overall, right? There were a couple of private keys embedded here. We do see that a lot, but it's generally just 1 or 2. Not great in this situation. So it's something to be aware of. A lot of these wallets are tightly coupled with NEM, which is interesting. This had by far the most subdomains talking to that. So you see in all the network traffic that's this package is capable of a lot of those connections. And for whatever reason, this wallet just had a much higher count. So maybe that is part of a service that they have or a feature set. This is where context matters, right? They also use Nodesmith.io, which is a software as a service kind of thing where it helps you connect to distributed networks. There's a lot of API calls and a lot of traffic and network communications to that and those services. But Nodesmith.io's website doesn't exist any longer. They are listed in some overall groupings and ratings of crypto related services. Their pages no longer exist. So they may not be in operation any longer, but you still have this traffic. That could be a risk later on. If someone picks up that domain down the line, you have a built-in attack vector. Looking through the behaviors, we see a couple of issues here. So we do see this specifically touching Trend microsecurity products and making changes. While that's not too out of bounds, it is interesting. And this isn't the only package with similar activity. It's something to be aware of. If that's a security product you use, you may see some issues. Accessing the webcam and microphone. I don't like to see that in any package that's not a video chat package. It is really strange here. I would be concerned about that. And FTP. There's a lot of FTP connections, and you would be surprised how many packages we see, modern day packages that still rely on FTP for communications. Not great. So let's go to Bitcoinomery, next one. Okay, so now we see a lot more CVEs that are exploit related. And now we see some older ones. We're going back to 2018. So we know we probably have aging components. In the center there, you can see the source of these vulnerabilities. Again, expat, zlib, OpenSSL. We'll see that across all of these packages. They generally have one or more of these, along with a lot of other packages. So each one indicates a cluster of CVEs. You update that, those CVEs go away. Those missing mitigations go away. So all those high, medium, and low issues on the left-hand chart disappear. All you have to do is update those things. It's not the vendor code, it's the third-party elements. This one had a lot more findings, and this just sort of gives you a breakdown of what's going on. So there are, obviously, we could see in the last slide, a lot of exploits, and some of them are older. So in here, we can see there are third-party components that are over a decade old. That accounts for a lot of your missing mitigations and other issues. And you can see the vulnerability counts. There are, on the left-hand side, there's 38 high and 79 medium. Almost 60 of those are related to OpenSSL, 2 different aging versions. Just for reference, the current version is 3.1. You're using 1.0. I don't even know how old those are. XPAD as well has 20 different CVEs. You update all 3 of those and your numbers on the left drop to almost nil. This is just a common pattern you see when you're doing software analysis. The behaviors, again, we see FTP. Not something you want to see in this type of application. There are a lot of behaviors related to enumeration. Now, in any application, depending on what it does, and depending on the use case and what it's supposed to do, there will be some enumeration. It has to find users. It has to know a lot of things about the host. Maybe it needs to know what the network connections are, grab the IP address, whatever. There's always going to be a handful of these. 19 behaviors specifically enumerating the host, REP sessions, network connections, network shares, right? Why does your crypto app need to collect that stuff? I'm always leery of anything that's collecting a lot of excessive information because it just presents another risk to you at some point down the line. So it's something to keep in mind for this one. Maybe that's not something you want to see in your crypto app. So overall build quality is average, right? These are issues that we see a lot across everywhere. It's nothing is striking here, but in relation to the type of application this is, it should be a lot more concerning. Definitely the heaviest use of FTP out of all of the apps we've seen. And this is, again, why that comparison across different products do the same thing helps. It gives you that context to understand, oh, that is out of bounds. That is weird. So Koinami, same thing, right? We see a lot of vulnerabilities. Some of them are older. We know exactly what that means. CVEs going back to 2017, 2018, they generally indicate an older package, an older third-party component. And again, you see the source here in the center. They're all dependencies. We see zlib. We see a bunch of new ones that we didn't see in other packages, which is fine. Different projects use different components. It doesn't really matter, but it's what those components bring with them. It's all the dependencies, all of the things that get rolled into that package once it's built. Those are the ones that bring these issues with them. So the source, again, for all of these is third-party packages. So overall, not a high number of issues. 100 meg was about the average size for these wallets. And it's a decent amount of issue. There were some compliance issues, but again, mostly mitigation related. So overall, not too bad. Again, OpenSSL accounts for a lot of this. The one gotcha here was that there is a URL in here to go pull down a Windows 95 version of Shockwave, which is horrendous. I would not use this wallet just for that. I don't know what it's doing or why it's there, but I would not want that on my computer. Same thing we see here is F-Secure. For whatever reason, this doesn't work well with F-Secure products. There are two different behaviors where it makes changes to F-Secure products. If you use those, maybe you want to stay away from this wallet. Overall, the quality is good, but those two elements there, the tampering of F-Secure and Shockwave, maybe you take a pass on this one. Electrum. So again, we see more vulnerabilities, but in some of the older ones. So again, OpenSSL, all of the main suspects are here. All four of those common components are in here, and they account for the vast majority. Even though those are in there, that is basically all of the issues, the high, mediums, and lows. They're missing mitigations and CVEs related to these third-party packages. You take all of those out, or you update those to new versions, and your package is golden. So again, same issues we talked about with third-party components. The use of wget to pull down things online, to pull down other files, is odd, right? It's already able to communicate with FTP and HTTP. It can go get files. The use of wget seems strange. So I would keep an eye on that. Again, FTP. Now, there were two wallets that had a lot of links to Tor sites. This one had by far more than any. Those are something that's a thread you might want to pull, is figure out what those are, what sits there, and why your wallet is communicating to Tor. Just another hidden risk. You never know how that can go. So again, it depends on your risk appetite for these things. Exodus as well. Not a bad package overall, right? There's only a handful of vulnerabilities with exploits. libtiff has a lot of those, but overall, again, 200 megs, not very many issues in this. Overall, this is a very good package, right? You're always going to see CVEs and vulnerabilities in just about every package, but as long as they're newer, they're not too bad, and they're not too critical, or malware isn't using them, the risk is a little bit lower, right? So it's all about context. Garda, more third-party components than the rest of these, but each one only has one or two or three vulnerabilities. So again, the totals aren't that bad, but they're spread out across a lot of things. And some of these just may be inherent in the system. These aren't necessarily aged out. They're not 5, 6, 8 years old. This is just part of that. Things just have vulnerabilities. So updating these as you go is great, but overall, this is a pretty good build, right? 100 megs, not that many issues, and they're generally all related to these CVEs and missing mitigations, but it isn't bad. Again, we see FTP, not great, but not as heavy use as some of the other wallets that we've seen. Sparrow is another one, another 100 meg file, but look, barely any CVEs, all tied to zlib. The behaviors, again, comparing the behaviors we see here with the other wallets, everything is in line with what we expect. It's doing the same things that all the other wallets are doing, which tells you, okay, then there's nothing odd that stands out of bounds, which is great. Now it makes the analysis of this package easier. Every new version that comes out, you keep an eye on these numbers, check the behavior changes, and you're good. You can, and a lot of packages are like that. If you're doing every update in a series, once you get that initial baseline and you walk through this initially, then you're just looking at changes. This is a really good package. Very low risk in this one. Spectre, again, like we saw before, there's a lot of third-party components with one or two issues, but they're not really that bad. There are some aging ones where you get some CVs going back to 2017. But again, it's not, there's no one package. There's no one smoking gun here. It's just spread across a lot. So as long as they keep these updated as new updated versions are available, then you shouldn't be too bad. Perfection is really hard in software. You shouldn't expect to see zero anything, but you just want to keep that as low as possible. So we do see some extra private keys in this one, more than normal, right? You generally see one or two. So 3 or more, but there's no other quality issues. So again, it's less of a concern. If there are private keys and there were aging, file rotten things that have been there for 10 years, all of those things together maybe raise the risk profile. It's a quality issue in the build quality. If they're not taking care of this, then these things should be a bigger concern. But they are doing a good job here of updating packages, keeping their third-party components updated. and not having too many of those. So it has a reduced attack surface. The size has a little bit to do with that, but overall, this is a good one. Again, we see webcam and microphone access. Not something I'd want related to anything financial. Depends on your risk appetite there, but that is a concern for me. Wasabi is the last one. And again, you can see the same thing. We see these same patterns show up in all of these components. So this is really what software supply chain security looks like. When you do this analysis, you start seeing these little cribs. When you see this, you're going to see X cluster of CVEs. zlib is always going to come with 4 to 6 CVEs if it's out of date. OpenSSL comes with a lot more depending on the version. So once you see that, you'll know what that correlates to. It makes the analysis a lot faster. It's not really that hard once you get into this because you see the same kind of patterns across all software you're going to analyze. Once again, here, it's a good build overall. Again, FTP use, but it's not excessive. Still, any FTP use in a financial related piece of software should be a concern. But again, it's 2023, and you'd be surprised how many software packages we see that still fall back on FTP for comms. I don't know. Maybe that's just never going to go away. Overall, this is a good package again, but we do see a couple of Tor URLs. Worth investigating. Maybe that's tied to a service or a feature or something. It's an uncontrolled thing. That's part of your attack surface. Assess that however you want. Overall, scanning across all of these packages, right? Like we talked about, there are some elements that you'll see repeated, and it makes analysis quicker, just like any other tool, any other type of analysis. Across all of these wallets, every single vulnerability we found was related to a third-party component. You fix those and you have no issues. Your packet is dead clean. But that is the problem with all of these things. And that's why software supply chain analysis is so important, because the third-party components are where all of these risks come in. If you are seeing these kind of things in the vendor's code, walk away, because they're not doing these tools. They're not doing these checks. They're just pushing this thing out. I wouldn't touch anything that has that. If you don't see fixes going along all the time, or maybe they did a new major upgrade, which introduces some of these things, as long as they're going to work those out, it's not as bad. But that kind of thing is an indication of the build quality and how much care they're taking and how much craftsmanship goes on to building these software components. If they don't care, then eventually it's going to bite you. We talked last session about file rot, and we mentioned it again here. Again, another really common issue is these aging components are the ones that carry all of these extra issues. Also, context. You have to view these wallets as a banking app. If your regular banking app did any of these things that were listed here, you'd be very concerned. So at the same token, you should be very concerned about any of these things here. That's why context matters. That's why you want to be able to leverage external things. What is this thing supposed to be doing? What do similar packages do? How do I know where the anomalies are? Going back to the vendor when there's a big update and go and look at the release notes so you can map new changes to what they're telling you was added to the package, just to make sure it all works the way it is and there's nothing that looks out of bounds, right? So as long as you keep doing this stuff, once you get 2 or 3 of these packages and you have a couple of diffs, this really is a lot easier. And then as you do more of these packages, you quickly see the shortcuts to, oh, I know what that is. I know what that is. So it seems like a lot of data when you first get started, but as you go, it just gets easier and easier. Guy, I think that was all I had, unless we have any questions.
Yeah, let's advance to the next slide. So if anybody does have any questions, please submit them through the Zoom Q&A feature, and we'll get right to them. But while we're waiting for that, Tim, I'm curious, you dug up a lot of information about CVEs, vulnerabilities, suspicious behaviors, and I'm sure everybody wants to know, how long did it take to generate all that information about these cryptocurrency wallets?
It took me a little longer because I don't really follow crypto a lot. So when I would see these things, I had to go back and do some research, which is typical. The first time through a package or a set of packages or a new type of software, you'll have to do that. You just need to build that baseline. But doing all this analysis, putting together all of this data for 9 different things, it took me about 8 hours. And that's just me tinkering the one service that we saw that was out of date. That was like 40 minutes of digging to try and figure out if it really was out, was their website down, that kind of stuff. But overall, the analysis isn't really that hard. To me, it was just looking up stuff for crypto and trying to understand why a crypto app would be going to Tor and doing the research that way. But overall, take those things out of the equation, 9 packages that I've never seen before, I don't know, just a couple of hours.
Okay. So here's a question. Are you able to determine the reachability of the third-party vulnerabilities?
Reachability. So the CV scoring maybe help you. I guess if reachability, you're talking about how easy it is to leverage. In our tool, we do have that intelligence built in, right? We leverage that corpus of data. So we can tell you, as we saw, that list of exploit exists for each set of CVEs. That's an enrichment as part of our platform. Other platforms may have similar things. We'll also be able to tell you, we'll tag these things if there is active malware using that specific CVE, which means maybe you don't even want that on, you don't want to push that update, or you just pull that package from your network because it's actively being attacked. And if the vendor's not going to fix it, then you're at risk.
I think they clarified what they meant by reachability by saying, are those vulnerabilities exploitable?
Yeah, that's based on the CV score. You'd have to check out that score. And that's all information. The platform, we have that. I think most platforms should give you that. That's a pretty basic enrichment. And that scoring will tell you whether there are any pre-requirements, how difficult it is to exploit, whether it's network accessible or you have to have access to the host. Do you have to have admin access before this thing is done? So that scoring and that CVE rating, just raw out of the box, will give you a lot of those, will help you answer a lot of those questions. But the overall ranking, the higher it's ranked, that generally means that there is an exploit available. It is reachable. You don't need all these preconceived things. And it's maybe not a high level of technical requirement to get past that. You don't have to go through a chain of 14 different vulns or loopholes to get to the point where you can execute that thing. So the easier it is to do, and if it's able to be done remotely, those tend to be higher. And those are the ones you want to take action on.
Okay. It doesn't seem like there's any more questions, so let's go to the next slide. For those of you interested in analyzing your own cryptocurrency wallets or your software supply chain security profile for any kind of software, we've got a free 14-day free trial available to you of the same software that Tim just used to analyze crypto wallets. And that link is available right now in everyone's chat. So there's no credit card required or software to install. Just create an account and you'll get 14 days of free access to a full-blown version of the same software that Tim just used to analyze software supply chain security. You can use it to analyze malware and code tampering embedded in your software components, or generate an SBOM listing all open source and third-party packages and software you're using, or leverage the platform to contextualize and prioritize alerts and threats in your software supply chain. Again, there's no charge, so please take advantage of this risk-free trial. And the next slide. Be sure to tune in to our next episode of Software Package Deconstruction, when we're going to take a look at Docker Desktop. Container security involves more than containers. It encompasses the tools used to create and manage them. In this episode, we'll take a look at one of the most popular container-related applications, Docker Desktop. Cyber criminals have already used malicious container images as a means to install crypto miners on enterprise networks, and that means they can also be used as part of a supply chain attack targeting cloud-native environments. If your organization, like so many others, uses containers, then this is an episode you definitely won't want to miss. It airs on Thursday, July 13th, and we look forward to you joining us then. Next slide. And that concludes this episode of Software Package Deconstruction. Thank you all again for attending. Please be on the lookout for announcements about future episodes from ReversingLabs. Have a great rest of the day, everyone, as well as a great rest of the week. And remember to broaden your view of software risk by securing your entire software supply chain.